Can you hear me? Oh, wow. Yeah, you can hear me. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our 20th Anniversary International Ocean Film Festival first panel discussion today. My name's Anna Blanco, and I'm the Executive Director, and I am so excited to have you here today. We are live streaming this conversation, so people all over the world are going to be able to hear our conversation. And this is the first of 4 panels that we're going to be discussing today. As an aside, you know, the festival is, our mission is to become the global platform for ocean literacy and education through independent film. And this year we have 42 films that we're showing, 3 VR screenings, 4 panel discussions, a student film competition, and we had our education program here on Thursday and Friday, and we had about 800 kids that got to see films about the ocean, most of whom would never have access to ocean films. So we're very excited about today. We're excited about our panel discussion. And I just want to welcome you and say thank you for being here. We'll be here a little bit later on at 3 o'clock for another panel, and then tomorrow also at 12 and 3. And throughout the weekend, the films are down at Cowell Theater if you haven't been there already. But thank you for having us. Thank you to our sponsors and our donors for making this festival possible and for making this conversation possible. I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, but I want to just say that we showed Deep Rising, the film Deep Rising, with filmmaker Matthieu Rytz on Thursday night. This is an incredible film and an incredible conversation, so we give thanks to each and every one of you for being here so that we can continue the conversation about a very important subject that's affecting our oceans today. So thank you for being here. I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Lance Morgan, who is our moderator with Marine Conservation Institute. So thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And Anna, thank you for inviting us all to be a part of this really important panel. So as Anna said, my name is Lance Morgan. I'm president of Marine Conservation Institute. I'm also part of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, which is a global coalition of about 100 organizations worldwide that has been working to come up to promote a moratorium on deep seabed mining. So before I introduce formally the panel, we have Matthieu, Jeanne, and Mickey with me. I'm going to give you a little background as to why this is such a significant issue and why right now is such a significant point in time. First, how many people have seen the film? Okay, so we have a pretty good number of folks who actually have seen it. We'll try our best to kind of fill you in a little bit on the film Deep Rising and some of the background. It really goes into a lot of depth and a lot of intrigue that kind of goes between, you know, the finance world and the management world and the science world and the regulatory world, and you kind of have this global perspective of this issue, and it tells a really good story, both from the standpoint of the actors who are trying to promote deep seabed mining and the scientists who are trying to say, maybe we need to take a moment and a pause and think about this a little bit more. And I think importantly for all of us, who is acting on our interests as the global population who's going to be affected by this, and who's making decisions for us. And so it's a really interesting tale. So if you haven't seen it, I would really encourage you, and maybe we'll have Matthieu talk a little bit more about how you might see the film in the coming months. So Deep Rising, as I said, first premiered at Sundance here at the Bay Area this week. In addition to Matthieu and the executive producers, we have Jason Momoa, who does the narration, does a fantastic job. As a marine biologist, I love the fact that they put the deep ocean as one of the characters in the film, so there's a lot of wonderful footage of deep sea marine life. And I think what is really important to note about this is it's not marine life the way we would normally think of it. The biodiversity is certainly as great or greater, but it's not biodiversity we would think of in terms of maybe seabirds or dolphins and whales. It's, I think he called it the kingdom of the jellies, the realm of the jellies, I think is the line from the movie. A terrific line. And there are many, many microscopic animals and a lot of bacteria in the deep sea, and you think, well, why is this important? Well, this is not only where life evolved, it is probably not just the largest ecosystem on Earth, but the most poorly understood ecosystem on Earth. And so what happens there is really critical to what is happening on our planet. So you might say, what is the deep sea? Yes, the deep sea actually does have a technical definition, but think of it as the part of the ocean that's beyond where light penetrates. So that's roughly about 200 meters. The average depth of the deep sea is something around 4,000 meters. So there's actually the largest livable, habitable space on the planet is in the deep ocean. It goes on in the dark. It's very cold. It's under tremendous pressure. Most of us will never have the chance to experience what it's like down there. I was fortunate enough to be a submersible pilot and be to at least a partial way down into the ocean. A lot of this mining we're talking about today is going to happen in this 14,000 foot range, right? Most people don't have any concept of that. The other thing about the deep ocean that's really significant is the fact that life and the processes that go on down there are on time scales of eons. We'll talk a little bit more about these polymetallic nodules, which are what deep sea miners are after. But these are things that accrete somewhat like a pearl, so a little speck of sand or something starts the nodule's life. And over the course of the life, accretion occurs. So that's, some of these metals we're interested in start to kind of clomb on to this sand grain. A potato-sized nodule is something on the order of 10 million years old. That's how slow this process is. And it has its own unique bacteria and other living organisms that come onto this nodule. It's thought that 50% of the biodiversity around these nodules is unique and only found in these nodule communities, which are on these deep seabeds. There are, of course, other forms of mining that we're likely to see if the miners have their way. Underwater mountains, seamounts have crusts that are rich in metals. Hydrothermal vents, which is another extremely rare community of the ocean, is likely to have some interest, again, because of some of the metals that are found there. But all of this has yet to begin. And I say yet, but that's a real big question mark and one that's explored again so well in the film. This is a moment in time, as I mentioned, in which we have seen a lot of progress in ocean conservation. We've gone from 10% should be protected to a global agreement last fall for 30% protection of the ocean. We just saw last month the world agree to a new treaty to protect the high seas, and this would give us for the first time the ability to establish marine protected areas in the high seas. And we've also are in the midst of the UN Decade for Ocean Science, and that's global acknowledgement that we don't actually know enough about what's going on in the ocean yet, let alone enough to commence with deep seabed mining, and yet here we are maybe just a few months out from a little-known UN agency greenlighting deep sea mining. So with that, we're going to explore a little bit more with the panel, just what is actually going on right now, and some of our assumptions about do we actually need these metals, and also hear some perspectives from different parts of the world. So I'd first like to introduce Matthieu Rytz, who's the filmmaker of Deep Rising. Excuse me, I'm going to read this quickly. Matthieu is a producer, curator, photographer, and award-winning film director. His first documentary, A Node's Ark, focused on the climate impacts to the island nation of Kiribati, and it has been globally acclaimed. Trained as a visual anthropologist, Rytz has a passion for storytelling, that has led him across the globe to witness and document complex human and environmental stories. He specializes in creating multidisciplinary, multi-channel projects using film, still images, and virtual reality, using whatever medium best serves the story. Okay, and then next to Matthieu is Jeanne Everett. Jeanne is Director of Programs and Operations at the Blue Climate Initiative, a global program that accelerates ocean-based solutions to climate change. She's here in the Bay Area, but they also operate out of French Polynesia. Deep sea mining became an issue that rose to the top of the Blue Climate Summit, which some of us had a chance to be a part of last year in French Polynesia. And since then, Jeanne has steered the Blue Climate Initiative to become an active member of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, working with others to raise the alarm and inform the public about the imminent and irreversible threats to the environment. Jeanne has civil engineering and MBA degrees and has worked for over 17 years on various international development projects across multiple countries in the Asian Pacific, focusing primarily on rural development, infrastructure, agriculture, with a growing emphasis on climate change and the environment. She also worked for the private sector energy production companies such as Rural Solar in the UK and California. And then we also have with us today Dr. Mickey Rogers from the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. She is an analytical chemist who recently received her PhD from the Ohio State University. She is now, has recently been awarded the Linus Pauling Distinguished Postdoctoral Fellow at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where she is part of the Terrestrial Atmospheric Processes Integrated Research Platform at the Environmental Molecular Sciences Laboratory. And that sounds impressive. I am sure she's going to explain to us what all of that means. But what I did gather from her is she does study aerosols, especially algal aerosols, so algae from the water that gets blown up in the atmosphere, and that this is a really an important part of our atmosphere. She plans to pursue a kind of a science policy career at the nexus between taking this science and applying it into public policy. And she's a STEM ambassador for the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She is here representing the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which is also the largest youth-led as well as youth leader development training program globally. And she has also been recognized as a future leader in climate by the Aspen Institute. Of course, there is one fun fact that she alluded to. She loves event planning, so we have a follow-on conversation to have about that. All right, so let's get started. What we'll do is we have a few questions on Q&A here, then we'll open it up after a little while to questions from you guys. So if you have a burning question, hang on to it. There'll be an opportunity for you. So Matthieu, why don't you tell us a little bit about the motivation and the journey for this film? I know just in the time frame that's shown in the film, you've been doing this for several years. It's had to been a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication. So tell us a little bit more about the film and the journey you've been on here.
Yeah, so the whole journey started in 2018, so it's been a journey already. It came after my previous film, Anote's Ark, where I was traveling the world with President Tong from Kiribati. And Kiribati is this massive ocean state in the middle of the Pacific. And what is quite interesting with deep sea bed mining is, all those states are kind of being very involved now. Nauru, Kiribati, Cook Island, all these Pacific states that are actually sitting on these enormous potential resources. So it was kind of a natural follow-up for me, working in the Pacific to learn about the story. But in 2018, it was very unknown story, basically. And now you Google deep sea bed mining, and I would say every single major publication, mainstream publication, journals, they've been publishing long reads and a lot of stories about it. So the marine biologist who at that time was working with the government of Kiribati came to me with a noodle and said, look, Matthieu, this is a battery in a rock. You have all the metal you need to power all those batteries, and the story just blew my mind away. It's like, what are you talking about? You're going to open up the seafloor, 4,000 meters down, the last pristine wilderness in the planet, power. And I was like, this doesn't sound like a good idea. And doesn't sound like, mining the deep ocean to power this energy revolution really the path forward. So I started digging into it. And I went to Jamaica, the International Seabed Authority, bring a camera and start recording those, negotiations. And at that point, I realized I was opening a Pandora box, basically, because I was like, wow, there's an organization, actually a UN instrument, that has the responsibility to protect and exploit a very schizophrenic, actually, mandate that is hidden somewhere in Jamaica, and they're responsible of almost 70% of the planet's surface, and they're taking decision on behalf of the rest of humanity behind closed door. So I started recording all this, and I realized quickly that actually, even if it's a UN, it's part of the UN, they're actually not keeping an archive of the recording, which is actually quite interesting. Is maybe I am today the only person in the planet with like the full archive of those negotiations, because they're not recording, and they actually even erase some of the negotiation, because they don't really want the global public to know about it. So I started doing this work and trying to understand, and I saw, like a good tension, like, because I mean, as a storyteller, you need to, bring those narratives. I said maybe a good tension is to bring, this character, Sandor, who is like really, he used to work with the International Seabed Authority, and is really like a very strong voice against deep seabed mining, and the miner himself, like someone who tried to explain why we should do it. And I saw, like in a film, it's going to create a tension to explain, why this is so critical. But what I didn't realize at the time is when I start following money, basically. And I start following money in geopolitics, and I realized that, it's one, if not the most important environmental story right now. Because globally what's happening is, for the last 100 years, oil and gas, and more, but the extractive industry and the oil and gas conglomerate, they build this massive infrastructure to dig oil out. We're moving away from fossil fuel. But we're building basically a narrative where we think, we're going in a green revolution, which we are, we need to, But in order not to lose kind of the monopoly on energy, they're actually transitioning from, oil and gas to a resource, nickel. Mostly nickel is the key here, is a new oil. To a metal that is very hard to find and is massively found in the ocean seabed. So all the oil and gas industry are actually able to refurbish the deep oil drilling infrastructure, all this, the same model of extraction to the seafloor in order to still control energy. So then when you're opening this Pandora box, you realize, oh, what is the player behind? It's not small startups, and that's the point. Like, you think, you see in the film maybe the metal company, and you feel like it's more like a really kind of almost like Californian way of pitching to VCs and just starting up. No, the real money behind is in the U.S. is Lockheed Martin, defense company, Gazprom, state-owned Russian oil company, Mine Metal, state-owned Chinese company, and so on and so on and so on. And you realize that actually nickel is a new oil. Nickel is the most important asset right now. So, that's, the story really goes, I think, through those layers of conservation, understanding, extraction, and really kind of seeing that we've been somehow brainwashed by some narrative that showed us that, it's no problem to build like a big gigafactory, based on nickel. No, there's a problem here. The good news is, she's going to talk a bit more after, but the good news is like we have solutions. We have new chemistry, we have green hydrogen, we have solutions that can be non-extractive form of energy.
Great. Yeah, so Jeanne, let's follow up with you. Tell us a little bit more about the Blue Climate Initiative and also the work and why you guys are interested in deep sea mining. Why do you care about this issue?
I'll keep this first answer short so we can
get
to the meat of it. So Blue Climate Initiative, really our mission originally, as you mentioned in the introduction, is working on ocean-based solutions to climate change. And it's a program that's spurred out of science, a conservancy that we have based in French Polynesia. We were doing local work, working on an island on ocean research and protection. And then we decided, well, doing local work is not enough to protect this island. We need to do international or global work in order to try to save the island and save what we can. So that's how the program Blue Climate Initiative came together. We've been working and accelerating really solutions across sectors, working with scientists, with investors, with innovators, with communities, from transport and energy to food nutrition, nature-based solutions, sustainable tourism. Tourism is a little bit of the origin of our story as well, of our program. And we've been doing that for 2-3 years. We put a summit together. We've given out some funding for some community work and some for-profit technical work. And then we realized, well, leveraging the ocean for climate change, if the ocean is going down the drain, literally, we're not going to be able to use it and to work with it as a partner, as an ally, to protect our planet and to help it and preserve it, to keep it doing what it's doing, what it knows how to do so well. And that's how we decided to really reallocate our resources and our efforts on a deep sea mining advocacy campaign. So we're still pushing our solutions, but over recent months, we've really concentrated, because of the urgency and some of the rules that maybe we'll get into in a little bit, and the timelines and the decision making and potential issuing of those licenses coming this summer. We reallocated our resources our efforts for the time being for this. So I'll keep it to that for now.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And Mickey, kind of the same question to you. Please fill us in a little bit more about Sustainable Ocean Alliance and why are you here? Why do you care about it?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's been really great. So I'm kind of here representing 2 different organizations. So I work for the Department of Energy at Pacific Northwest National Lab, and I'm studying the relationship between the ocean and our atmosphere, which is a really complex thing to be thinking about, but really crucial to what deep sea mining is going to be impacting. And then I'm also here representing Youth Voice and Youth Ocean activists through Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which is the largest youth network of ocean advocates in the world. It's including over 6,000 youth ocean leaders and spanning over 165 different countries, maybe even more now. It's growing every day. And so basically here to kind of talk about what it means to be an early career scientist in the youth space and how we need to be advocating for our ocean, because if we don't have our ocean, what are youth scientists, future generations of scientists, what are youth advocates, future generations of advocates, what are they supposed to be fighting for? And so I'll be talking a little bit about the importance of the science of the ocean and kind of some of the efforts that the youth ocean advocates with Sustainable Ocean Alliance, SOA, have been leading.
Yeah, great. All right, so I think we're going to first try and paint a little bit of a picture. I'm going to ask Matthieu to describe what this, if deep sea mining goes forward, what is it actually going to look like, and what kind of scale, and what do these mining implements look like?
Yeah, I think the most important question here is to look really at the supply chain crisis, and understanding what are the production of nickel extraction, basically, you know. So it's deep seabed mining, but it's nickel as a whole, you know. And I think I want to bring, you know, I mean, the pricing and the debate is around deep seabed mining, but I just want to open up a bit around, you know, what does that mean to extract nickel globally. A third of the nickel right now is actually, you know, Russian-based, and it's in the north of Siberia. Like basically all the nickel they're getting is in the permafrost, basically, where the permafrost is. So extracting all this nickel for batteries is melting the permafrost and getting all this enormous amount of methane out in the atmosphere. The rest of nickel is under the rainforest, under the equator, basically, mostly in Indonesia, New Caledonia, Madagascar, Cuba, like all this ecosystem where you have to remove pristine rainforest and the topsoil and extract the nickel. And by far the biggest deposit of nickel on the seafloor. So there's no green nickel, what I mean. It's like every single gram of nickel for batteries is destructive. So if you look at the prediction, you know, we're talking about 700% growth by 700% around between 4 to 7, depending on the, you know, the graphs and then the prediction by 2030, if we keep the same battery technology. So if we keep the same battery that are used now in Gigafactory, in Teslas, and most of the EVs and all these different things, I mean, you have, again, there's a solution. But if we keep that path, you know, that's where we're going. So understanding that is critical, because if that supply chain is challenged by disturbing with new technology, bringing green hydrogen, bringing other solutions, non-nickel-based batteries and all, you know, there's a reason why there's billions of dollars that's going to be invested to dig up the seafloor, is because it makes profit, period. Like, I mean, there's no one who's going to spend all this money just to dig a metal out that doesn't have that value in the global market. So I think it's why I'm focusing a lot also with Deep Rising and the story and the campaign of understanding this critical thing. So in my perspective, in order to avoid deep seabed mining or trying to protect the ocean is really challenging that narrative and that supply chain things. But if we're not doing it, again, there's some of the biggest players, biggest money, oil and gas, extractive, defense, will pull the money they need to open up the seafloor and get the nickel out. I don't think there's something that's really going to stop them if the value of nickel remains so high and goes high.
Right. Yeah, so that's a perfect transition to you, Jeanne. What is the demand for metals, and what are the potential alternatives to nickel that are out there with battery technology?
Yes, so actually there's a lot more than mining promulgators would like to talk about or like to advertise. You mentioned on Thursday night, well, at the forefront of new battery technologies that don't use neither nickel nor cobalt nor manganese nor copper, which are the four metals that are containing those nodules that are being used in general in renewable energy. LFPs, lithium iron phosphate, are the batteries that are already the most commercialized and are out there. Tesla in 2022, 50% of new cars coming out of Tesla factories were using LFPs. So Tesla already, even though they're not even one of the companies that are intentionally wanting to be environmentally friendly in regards to mines and intentionally trying to not source those types of minerals, commercially and technically, it makes sense for them to go with those batteries, regardless of deep sea mineral issues or not. I mean, it's expensive, of course, to go down there. You mentioned on Thursday night that LFP is also, BYD is also, which is the biggest EV manufacturer in the world. They're already using that technology as well. And you're saying that 90% of domestic market manufacturing in China was also using LFP batteries. So that's at the forefront. That's a technology that's the most obvious replacement. The other types of batteries that are out there that also providing interesting performance, technically performance in terms of good range. They have lower in terms of fire risk. There's solid state batteries is another type of battery that is out there. One of the companies, there's quite a few companies already that are adopting stuff, that are testing, that are developing. They have not been yet put in cars, but they're nearly there. QuantumScape is one of the companies that's at the forefront. They're working with Volkswagen, and they're expecting to have those batteries in Volkswagen and commercialized by 2025, so very close. A lot of other technology providers are also working with car manufacturers. I went through the whole list of my database yesterday. I don't think I can come up with one single car vehicle brand that wasn't working on some form of alternative battery technology with a technical partner. So everybody is putting a lot of R&D into that effort. There's also sodium ion is another type of battery, same thing. They're the biggest battery manufacturer in China. So not the car manufacturer, which is BYD, but the battery manufacturer, which is CATL, is also looking at mass producing this starting this year. And there's another 30 companies out there that are also working on that technology. Sodium sulfur is another solution that apparently is going to be a game changer. Again, it's not quite commercialized. This is a newer technology coming out of Australia. And then lithium silicon anodes also is another solution that's becoming quite popular with a lot of countries there. Mercedes-Benz and GM are also involved in development of those solutions. Again, I have a large number of companies that are working in that technology. So that's just the new technologies for new chemistries that are not using those metals. Then there's I have another list of about 50 different technologies that are working on recycling and circular life and circular economy models. We're looking at, by 2030, the market for EV batteries is expected to be $10 billion in terms of recycling. In terms of, I have to get my numbers here correct. I want to make sure I don't get that wrong. We're looking at I think 10 billion is for 10 to 20 billion between the battery recycling technologies. There's also, WWF put out a report last year. They're expecting that by 2050, about 58% of the demand for such minerals, or such batteries, I should say, will be provided by, if everything goes on track with the momentum that we're already building, by either new technologies or recycling. So we're only looking at 42% still using the old economy, the old models. Well, it turns out that right now, at current rates of land source minerals, of those precious minerals or rare minerals, right now are expected to supply about 30 to 40% of 2050's demand. So if you do the math, if the assumptions are the same, which these are two different numbers from two different sources, so I'm not sure there's something, but basically if we do the math, potentially we don't need anything other than the trends that we're already building in terms of new technologies, recycling, and of course continuing to do some land mining, but doing it better than what we've been doing so far. Then there's a third source, the third that I'll go very briefly, and unfortunately I don't have a solution for nickel, for clean sources of nickel. In the case of cobalt, which is still and potentially still an important metal in the traditional technologies, there's some work being done to extract metal using passive absorption from seawater. And maybe you've heard about this, I don't know, I'm turning to the scientist here. There's been talking about converting oil wells in Gulf of Mexico, turning into cobalt farming, cobalt harvesting. And lithium, they can do that from lithium too. Lithium, I haven't been looking at it so closely, but you're right, you can extract lithium because lithium is not one of the minerals in the nodules, but it is, you can also get lithium out of seawater, which would solve some of the land issues of land mining issues of lithium. So that's kind of paint the pictures that there's a lot of hope. A lot of people are putting a whole lot of money into this research and development. And there's already, as we know, LFP is already in the market, is already a high supplier of the number two, first and second biggest car manufacturer, EV manufacturers in the world, Tesla and BYD. But then there's all these other technologies that are about to be put into cars in the coming years. So there's hope.
On the lithium question, I also will note for us Californians in the room that the Salton Sea is apparently being proposed as a new source of lithium from that type of activity you were mentioning. All right, I think we'll probably move on from this topic and we'll loop back to it, I'm sure, in further conversation. But I'd like to turn to Mickey a little bit as a scientist and as someone who studies these larger planetary issues. Can you comment a little bit about just the risk of disturbing the deep sea and its role?
So I would say that the ocean is our greatest climate champion. Without the ocean, we're not going to have regulation to control the climate. So we really need to maintain the oceans for the sake of our planet and our existence. And so Lance kind of mentioned that I study algae in the air, which is a totally different thing. But these algae are a really big part of why the ocean is so important and why it is this climate champion. And so when I say the word algae, some of you might be thinking about harmful algal blooms or red tide, something like that. But according to NOAA, 99% of algae is really good. And so algae are these photosynthetic species in the water, seaweed and kelp. Those are macroalgae, but I'm going to be talking about microalgae, these little microscopic cells that are in the water. And so what they do is they sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So when CO2 is in the air and it comes into the ocean and it dissolves into the water, these phytoplankton are using this carbon dioxide to convert into oxygen for us. They actually give us over 60% of the oxygen on the planet, so we really are in support of phytoplankton helping us breathe. But in addition to the oxygen that they're making, they're also using CO2 for what they need to produce their different sugars and their proteins and what they need to function. And these phytoplankton are the basis of the food web in the entire ocean. And so other creatures come in and eat these phytoplankton, like zooplankton, and then those are eaten by things like maybe krill or other fish, things like that. But the point is, these phytoplankton that take that initial carbon, they convert it into organic carbon. When these other species eat them up, they'll eventually die. And so this process of them dying and kind of sinking down to the bottom of the ocean is kind of how we get our carbon sink. And so also in this process, there are microbes in the ocean that can eat these decomposing species, eat the expelled waste from the species that are sinking down to the bottom of the ocean. And this is where we get something called marine snow. If you've ever seen some like footage of kind of the snow in the deep sea, this is the decomposing carbon that came from the atmosphere that was turned into organic carbon by the species in the ocean, sinking down and settling to the bottom of the ocean. And so in this way, once they get to the bottom of the ocean, carbon can be sunk here. It's a carbon sink, and they can stay there for centuries. And so the ocean is playing this really important role of taking carbon from the atmosphere and putting it in the deep sediment of the ocean so that it's not acidifying our atmosphere and exposing us more to CO2. And if we're going to be deep sea mining, there's a possibility in which we could be disrupting the carbon sink that's already in there. And scientists are still trying to figure out, is this going to be releasing more CO2, more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? And it's a very likely possibility that it will. Another thing that could be happening from deep sea mining is that when they're going down and collecting these nodules, they're releasing these toxic plumes that are really concentrated in the metals that were in the deep sea. And by releasing these really toxic plumes, it gets into the water column where these really important phytoplankton are living, and it can be a potential threat to their existence. And if we don't have phytoplankton, we don't have a food web in our ocean, we don't have something combating the acidification in the ocean from the CO2 just dissolving and not having a source to be turned into organic carbon. And we don't have oxygen. We can't breathe. And so really deep sea mining is a threat to this very fundamental source on our planet that is keeping us alive.
It reminds me of E.O. Wilson's Little Things That Run the World, you know, just
Yeah.
the big global, massive 70% of the world perspective. Yeah, very, very, very critical. I was going to ask Matthieu, I know we were talking about the fact that we understand mining of all types is very destructive. However, I was also disturbed in the movie, and maybe you can comment on this a little bit more, by Gerard Barron's comment that it's just kind of like picking little pebbles off the beach, and you know, these are just kind of rocks anyway, so why are we all upset? And you know, so maybe you can comment on that. And I guess, you know, for a biologist, I think it's a little bit easier to see through that comment. But you know, do people understand that, you know, that isn't the reality here? I mean, what's your experience with showing that?
There's a few important things here. One is, you know, nodules take 100 million. Up to 100 million years to form. They grow. They are growing. There's not a dead rock. There's an interaction between bacteria and the marine snow and sinking matter. So through the million of years, at the geological scale, you know, the bacterial activities actually forming those nodules. So they're living organisms at the geological scale. So removing them is, you know, removing like old-grown trees in the rainforest. You're removing, you know, some fundamental piece of an ecosystem. So even if you're not digging, you know, you're just picking, you know, like collecting them, you know, you're still removing. It will be like, you know, going to the rainforest with like large military helicopters and just taking all the old-grown trees and you know, everything under the canopy stays. It's like, no, we keep, you know, we're not destructing the forest. We're just removing all the old trees, you know. So it's I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if the metaphor is good enough, but I mean, it's kind of this. The thing is the area. So the world's biggest landmine in a planet is in Chile. You see it from the space. It's a copper mine. It's an enormous pit. It has 3.5 kilometers diameters. So it's this enormous pit. Every single area in the Clipperton is 75,000 square kilometers. So also it's an extent. It's as big as the size of Europe. You know, they're opening up for mining. So it's also, you know, the ocean is kind of so big that it's like, yeah, we're just gonna, you know, mine a bit of it. But this bit of it is the size of Europe. But at the end, to your point of the plume, you know, there's been modeling, and actually, I mean, the point is so expensive to do science. really. I mean, you know about it. It's one of the most, it's the most expensive place on the planet to do science. We're talking 4 kilometers down, 15 days of, chartering. It's 40 million to start with just to bring the boat there and back to San Diego. Most of them start from San Diego. It's 15 days just to go to the place. And so, the miners, they need to do the environmental assessment. So, they bring scientists on board and they do those all like just trying to do the science. And, some of the latest reports show that the plume goes like 150 meters and then kind of sinks. So the point is like we don't actually know. We don't know, like if it's going up to like releasing carbon to the atmosphere, like all this. But for me, that's exactly the point. Because we don't know enough, we should slow down, So I think no one can really like have a clear statement of what's happening, because on the science side, on the mining side, there's no clear answer. But because there's no clear answer, it's I think that's what is very as an ethical level. Should we open up a new oil industry if we don't know enough? Because history showed that when we were taking the whale oil to light the streets, that's what I show in the film, of, we light the street of London and doing it and doing margarines and, all products with whales, thinking there's unlimited amount of whales, and at one point we just, we collapse the whole, there's like only 5% of sperm whales are, still alive. So we find a new solution, oil and gas, fossil fuel. And it takes what? It's like 50 years to realize, we messed with the planet with this. So my question is like, can we afford to open up this new industry and with not enough science, and be in 30 years' time and look back? It's like, what did we do? So it's like, I think this is fundamental.
Yeah. The other thing that I think the videography that you show of the deep sea organisms is really compelling, is that you don't appreciate what a plume will do to all these little microscopic filter feeders, bioluminescing organisms. Right now, the water is really clear, right? A little tiny animal can flash a little light and, find a mate, or, if you're an angler fish, maybe fool something into coming in so you can eat it. But, suddenly there's a big cloud of dust, and, not only can they not respire, they're clogged up with all the sediment, they can't see. It's a really interesting, and you don't really appreciate that unless you see the film. You see just these tremendous colors that are, there in terms of bioluminescence, and all these really fine little cilia that, these animals use to capture food. And it was, I thought, a really well done part of the film.
Before you do the next question, I want to add a couple things.
Yeah.
In the comparison of the clear cutting, the seabed is like clearing a forest, with the difference is that the old growth trees and forests are 100 years old? So, and nature will come back and will potentially rebuild. Those minerals, the average age of those nodules are 13 million years old. It took them on average 13 million to be there. And another point I also wanted to add is at the bottom of the sea, the sediment, the powder is so soft. The life actually doesn't attach to the sediment, to the seafloor. It only attaches to the nodule. Those are the only solid support where life can attach. So if we take those out, it's not like life around it will stay. There's nothing else to cling on to for life to cling on to. So it's pretty dramatic in terms of
the nurseries.
Explain that.
So basically, I mean, like octopus, Dumbo octopus. I mean, larval form just put the eggs. On another. So if you remove the nodules, you don't have the nurseries. So
the nurseries,
nurseries, they cannot, species cannot reproduce.
They can't reproduce, yeah.
And then I'll add one more comment real quick, but we've only explored 1% of the seabed as scientists, and we've explored more of Mars' surface than we have our own ocean floor. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty that is too risky to chance with when we're thinking about deep sea mining. And there are a lot of really important microbes at the bottom of the ocean that we need to study before we take a chance of making them go extinct. And so that's why we really need to take the time for science to develop so that we can make informed decisions.
And on that point, medicine is using a lot of those molecules from the deep ocean. A lot of sponges are used for medical development, which eventually they can recreate those molecules in lab, but when they first discover a molecule, usually they go to the bottom of the ocean to learn about those.
Did you have a question on this point before we move on? Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Actually, it's to move a little bit into some of the regulatory issues. So,
Well, we're coming up on regulatory issues, so if you're,
Well, it's a
go
little
ahead
bit-
quickly,
Yeah.
we'll transition,
a
sure.
little bit of a timeline around that. So, you know, the issue sort of was very much in the news about a decade ago, you know, when Papua New Guinea gave a concession to the Nautilus.
Yeah.
And a lot of the same kind of things that are being discussed now were discussed then, and it sort of just, Nautilus is referenced in the film, and it sort of faded away. And it came back, what, 18 months ago or so, and now we gave, you know, a concession. So my question is sort of what happened in between, both in terms of knowledge being gained about the impact, as well as what, if anything, changed from the regulatory side that allowed a country once again to be given a concession to a mining company, and in the context of discussions on the High Seas Treaty and everything else. So that element of it, I'm interested in knowing sort of the timeline.
Sure.
Sort of what happened behind the scenes in between.
Great segue.
Well, yeah, good, yeah, great question. Moves us on to the next, one of the next topics we wanted to cover, and that is exactly the governance issues here. So I'll let you, Matthieu, go first. Fill us in a little bit more on what has gone on with the Nautilus to Deep Green to the metals company, and then also this issue of working with Nauru to kind of move forward with the regulations and the mining activity.
Yeah, it's a long story. It's a complex story, so I try to see like what is. So I mean, Nautilus Mineral was an attempt, never worked, went bankrupt, to mine gold, mostly gold, within the Papua New Guinea water on the hypothermal vents. So it's becoming a bit confusing here because, you know, when you're talking about deep seabed mining, there's three different type of mining. There's hypothermal vents, deep seabed nodules, and the crust, the cobalt crust. I would say from the International Seabed Authority and the globally, you know, the negotiation, everything is around, you know, deep seabed nodules. It's kind of, you know, no one at the IAC right now is actually even considering going after the hypothermal vents, because it's so vibrant ecosystem that, you know, it's like it's too much basically. And I mean, you cannot just start. But the problem we have here is that's a very important distinction. You know, so what you call the EEZ, which is the national waters. Every country has, you know, a part of the ocean which belongs to itself, to the country, and then you're entering the ICs. So the International Seabed Authority only deal with the ICs, no with territories, national territories. But this project of mining within the national jurisdiction, so Papua New Guinea is one. Norway actually, you know, is opening up. Japan is looking at it. Cook Island. But Namibia is looking for diamonds, and PNG was looking for gold. So this project you're referring to is. What is very important to understand also is, you know, if there's like as you mentioned, Cook Island, Kiribati, Nauru, all those Pacific islands, they have a lot of nodules within the EEZ. So a risk here, again, if we're not challenging the supply chain, is let's say, you know, all the effort of banning deep sea mining and putting the moratorium forward, and you know, we got at the international agreements at the International Seabed Authority that, you know, deep sea mining is banned, or, you know, moratorium, you know, 10 years or 20 years or 50 years moratorium, whatever it is, doesn't stop a company like the metal company to start mining the nodules within the Cook Island water. You know, so it's important to make this distinction because it's, you know, there's different and then the problem we have is obviously going to a place like Papua New Guinea. Well, it's, you know, no surprise here is corrupt governments. So it's not like mining hypothermal vents in Australia, you know, or New Zealand, where, you know, you have to deal with the government there, and they will be like, no, we don't do this. PNG, you know, there's a problem a bit. Like, I mean, those kind of country, we actually come with a suitcase of cash, and that can be enough to, you know, make the government allow, you know, company to start doing these things. So, you know, I think it's And I just wanted to bring this important distinction about, what happened.
And the governance regime, obviously is different if you're talking about a state or what's going on at the International Seabed Authority. But I think you also have to remember that mining is going on because of a few global miners, really, that are investing in it. So once they have this equipment built, they're going to go looking for places to recoup the cost of that equipment. And so if they can't go to the high seas, maybe they will go to the Cook Islands or Tonga or Nauru or, back to PNG. Some of the Kiribati, some of these places do have these polymetallic nodules. Now, to date, they've all been pretty slow to move forward, but, if this capital investment and this equipment is out there and they've got these big boats and these big mining equipment, they're going to want to recoup that capital. And so what Nauru and the Metals Company have initiated as of a couple of years ago, which is this point in time coming up on this 2-year rule, was they put in place a fairly Byzantine rule, but basically it said, if you guys don't have regulations and you can't come up with them in 2 years, we get to go mine. Right? And now there's a lot of pushback on that because, again, this is the common heritage of mankind we're talking about, right? This is a decision being made on the behalf of all of us in the room and everybody on the planet. And yet at the same time, we're not part of that conversation. It's in this kind of opaque UN agency that operates in Kingston, and it's very far from where people can look at by a country, Nauru, which is 8 square miles, 10 or 11,000 people. There's not a lot of ability of this country to provide oversight into this big international mining, world. So, however, we do have people like Jeanne and the Blue Climate Initiative who've been working across the Pacific with Indigenous leaders. So, tell us a little bit more about that work and the voice of this community.
Yeah, maybe that's. Maybe just to transition into that, just to clarify about some of the issues with the ISA. So it's a body that does not report to the UN, even though it's UN agency-like, it does not. So the Secretary General of the ISA does not report to anybody, only to himself. And then the decisions that are being made, the work that's being made, the recommendations are being made, are done by an inner body of the International Seabed Authority called the Legal and Technical Commission. It's a group of 41 individuals. They are the ones who operate behind closed doors. So though they don't operate like a typical UN agency meeting where you have all the countries with all their names and it's all public, it's all broadcasted, none of that. All of the work is done by these 41 individuals. The documentation that they review is not necessarily shared. Maybe their final decisions will be shared, but nothing in between. The contracts they have with mining or the license contracts are also not necessarily, the negotiations are not shared. What they do, and the way that the regulation is set up now, or the language is set up, is that they make a recommendation on a plan of work, and then the council, which is the next level up a body, and then there's the assembly, there's kind of a council and an assembly, there's an expectation that they would take on, the council is the executive body of the ISA. Right now, there is, and this is what the miners are playing towards, there's some language that implies, and I'm choosing very carefully my words here because lawyers can interpret this in very different ways, and hopefully that will be the case, but one interpretation of the way the language is written is that the council, which is executive body, is basically expected to approve and act upon a recommendation of the Legal Technical Commission unless they can vote a 2/3 majority or higher. Now, a 2/3 majority or higher, you can say, okay, well, on deep sea, it might not be so hard to achieve because it's such a disaster. So even if the LTC did recommend go mining, you would think maybe it's possible. One issue is that 2/3 majority, as I understand it, is applied. There's subgroups within the council. 4 of the 6 subgroups, there's only 4 countries in them. If 2 countries out of the 4 are pro-mining, even the majority has to be achieved in each one of those subgroups. I'm getting a little bit mathematic here. But basically, it would only take 2 countries in a group of 4 to say, we are okay with this, to prevent the council from saying no to recommendation to go ahead. This is what's scary, and this is why there's a lot of lawyers looking at this very carefully. There's a lot, and there's options already being initiated by both by the Assembly, some countries on the Assembly and on the Council, to be able to manage that risk and to find ways around it. But this is the part of the written language that is scary, and this is what's getting everybody really worried. And this is what the mining companies are basically claiming in media. Oh, it's locked in. We are mining in July. We're going to start this summer, because they are interpreting this the way that they want to interpret it. But there's, of course, it's a big legal debate. So I just wanted to make that point. I mean,
and the US never ratifies the law of the sea anyhow. So, if Lockheed Martin tomorrow wants to go and mine the seabed, they don't have to ask the permission to the International Seabed Authority. And around 6 months ago, the Biden administration signed a wartime act to access to critical metal that was built around the time of the Cold War. So basically what it means is the White House under this executive order can use wartime, wartime rules, wartime options, basically, to access to the critical metals if they are in a position of saying this is a threat to national security. So whatever we're talking here actually doesn't apply for the US and Lockheed Martin and the militaries if they want to get the nickel. Because they never ratified.
There are only 2 countries that didn't ratify, or something like that? Or
Yeah, I think North Korea and Syria.
Yeah, something like that. There's 3 countries. Yeah, no, really, it's pretty. And so, segue into the Pacific. So, countries are taking a stand, and there's now 14 countries that have taken a stand that they're supporting either a moratorium or precautionary pause or a ban on deep sea mining. The momentum is building up. A year ago, we had much fewer countries. I don't know how much it was, but over the last year, there's been a lot of new countries coming on board.
Last year and a half, yeah.
And maybe just to add also, the Secretary General, I mean, the ISA itself is the one who nominates the member of the LTC.
Yeah.
And that's also what happened in the last few years. I don't have the exact number, but I know from the main character of the film, Sandor, who used to be the environmental director of the ISA. And when he started working at the ISA, he said to me that half of the LTC were scientists. Marine biologists, is a marine geologist, people working in the ocean. Apparently now there's none. There's only policymakers and lawyers and people who have the know-how to actually draft an international regulation and rules. So they remove all the science from it. So it's like they're focusing really on making this code happen.
So I'm gonna, I know we got into some really wonky, deep details there on the ISA. And I think to summarize, it's not just Byzantine, it's probably not fit for purpose, and that means that the way the ISA was originally built and designed, is really about trying to get mining started, not to actually protect the ocean, as we were alluding to earlier, which is the 2 mandates that they actually have, one to protect the deep seabed area as well as to facilitate mining, and they're very much caught in this problem in a very significant way. However, as Jeanne started to tell us, we do have a growing momentum here. We have 14 countries, including France, that are one of the biggest ones that's opposing this move into deep sea mining. But we also have this traditional community across the Pacific that's very much moving, and so tell us a little more about that.
And this is so the deep sea and the high seas are considered the common heritage of humankind. Countries or the societies in the Pacific really have a spiritual and almost a familial connection. They really see the deep sea as their ancestors. They have a very in their traditions, in their songs, in their culture, and they really see this as they're very connected to the deep sea. So they have come together, leaders from across the Pacific in recent months, seeing what's happening, observing what's happening, and some countries in the Pacific, I think 6 of the 14 countries that have standing against deep sea mining are Pacific Island countries, have put together a petition and raised their voices, and they actually 4 or 5 delegates were at the International Seabed Authority meetings. The last meetings, or most recent meeting was in March of this year, and came and they spoke on the floor of the ISA to say, basically, you do not have our free and prior informed consent. This is impactful and is a pretty powerful language, because even though the ISA has its own regulations and they go by their own rule, the rest of the world, such as the High Seas Treaty and the CBD COP and the COP 15 back at the end of last year, a lot of them have come up with a language. We need to listen, and we need to incorporate the opinion and the voices of Indigenous people in our decisions about the CDC. And I have written language that says that, and there's even written language from COP15 that says that asking the ISA, even though the rest of the UN bodies do not have a legal power of the ISA, they're writing in their language, official language, we ask the ISA in making decisions, before they make final decisions, to take into consideration, to take into account the knowledge and voices of Indigenous people. So the request, the ask is there. These Indigenous leaders have put a petition together. There's over 1,000 voices from 36 countries and 56 Indigenous groups across the Pacific who have come to the floor and said, we do not agree, we're not okay with this. And that says that it had a very strong impact on certain delegates at the ISA. Unfortunately, we haven't turned everybody yet, but that's another angle, another big important voice that's emerging in this debate.
I think one of the points you're alluding to there, and I'll ask Mickey to comment on this as someone whose future is to play out here, we don't yet see the social license to actually move forward on deep sea mining. And so I thought it'd be important to hear from you, just kind of the next generation, the youth generation, the perspectives of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance and on this topic.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off with mentioning that I was recently in Panama for the Our Ocean conference, and I was there as an Our Ocean youth leader. And so I was one of around 70 youth leaders, and apparently youth means 35 and under, just so everyone knows. But I was one of 70 plus youth leaders to be awarded this great opportunity to go to a leadership summit in Panama and connect with individuals from over 44 different countries. And we all came together and we were brainstorming really great ocean innovations and how we can protect our ocean for our generation and the next. And so coming together as youth people under 35 and kind of brainstorming these really great ideas together was a really great opportunity, and it just showed how powerful this generation and those to come are going to be in being players for our ocean. And so something I wanted to mention, I just realized this recently, but at one of the recent ISA meetings, Sustainable Ocean Alliance had the opportunity to be there and speak. However, they only had the opportunity to be there and speak and offer their youth voice because the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition invited them to be there. And so without that invitation to be there, there was really no opportunity for youth voice to be heard, and there's really no stakeholder opportunities to be heard in general, like Indigenous voices, unless they're extended an invitation to actually be there. So I just want to show how important it is for all of the different voices to be at the table when we're talking about the ocean, which belongs to all of us.
So I'll ask this question to you. I actually know the answer, but we had a question that came up through the people watching online, and it is, does SOA have a petition I can sign? So go.
Yeah, so I have a couple of action items that I want to share. I don't know how we're doing on time, but maybe I'll just go ahead and share them.
Time to go.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So I'll first start with, yes, SOA does have a petition and a lot of great resources online. And so if you're someone who identifies as a youth person, you can also join an SOA hub. So there are hubs all across the world. And so you can just kind of join this team of really inspired, passionate leaders that are trying to save the ocean. Another resource that I want to point out is the Look Down Collective and a podcast that they have about deep sea mining that is definitely worth checking out. If you, these are actions that anyone can take, but you can check out the Oxygen Project online. They have a really great resource, and if you feel informed, you can sign their petition against deep sea mining. And if you are someone who identifies as a scientist, so the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, or DOSI, has really been integral in presenting science voice at these ISA meetings. And so I had the really great opportunity to connect with Beth Orcutt, who works at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences, and she's a scientist volunteering her time to speak for the deep sea. And so there is the Seabed Mining Science Statement that you can sign if you're a scientist, and there's over 400 marine scientists that have signed this form saying that they do not agree with deep sea mining. And then I guess the last thing I'll leave with is all of you are consumers, and you can be empowered in your choice as a consumer, and something we need to think about is our electric vehicles. And so we can make choices about the electric vehicles we want to buy and where they're getting their metals for those batteries. And one other last thing you could do is, I know you all probably have a shoebox at home filled with random old phones and music devices. Recycle those. Try to find an electronics recycling place, and that is a step that you can take today.
As a US citizen, press your government so they ratify the law of the sea.
And if I can
Yeah,
have a couple
tell us a little
more-
bit more about your
So there's,
climate initiative.
to add
website
in terms of more action items to add to the Oxygen Project petition is one of the ones that has gathered the most voices. It's actually housed on a platform called Only One. There's another petition that started 2 weeks ago that has even had more voices. This is a change.org. It's now at 350,000 voices. So I encourage everybody to sign both. I mean, the more of us out there, the better. So change.org and Only One are for every citizen in the world. The scientist one you mentioned. And then if you are connected with any indigenous group or communities in the world, the Blue Climate Initiative is hosting a platform, and there's a sign-on sheet there for indigenous representatives and their allies. We also have non-indigenous signatories who are signing that petition. They have a way to indicate it and when you fill the form. So I also wanted to mention that. And then again, lobby your government. As Matthieu says, put pressure. This is how a lot of pressure was put on France to sign it, to adopt a ban. They are now at the forefront. A couple weeks before they announced the ban, their position, a petition of, I can't remember how many signatories and letters of NGOs was deposited on the floor of the National Assembly. So that has an effect. So whether it's individual voice or bringing organization, go to the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition website is really the umbrella organization. So if you go there, you will see kind of a tree of all the different options and different interventions. Your company as well, especially if your company is in the business, or your employer, or you have people and they're working with that are using metals in whatever industry that you're in, they can sign, corporations can sign on to, as part of their ESG campaign and platform, to commit not to be using metals from the deep sea until further notice. You know, and you can, there's careful language that you can decide it depending on what's appropriate, what they're comfortable with. I really encourage, we're looking for many more. We have Volvo and BMW and Google and Samsung. There's big corporations that have already made a statement. It's a big deal, but we need a lot more. We especially need actors in the renewable energy, because that is the token, that's the flag, the ticket that mining companies are using. Oh, we need this for renewable energy. But if renewable energy companies are signing us that no, we don't, then this will really pull the rug from under the mining advocates. So just putting it out there.
And just briefly, I'm going to give Matthieu the last word, but before we go there, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition website is savethehighseas.org. There's tremendous resources there. Marine Conservation Institute, we also have some resources on our website. I would also like to point out we had a recent campaign with a group called Loop Mobile, which was trying to encourage people to use and buy used Apple iPhones and computers. They recycle them and put them back out on the market. So this issue of recycling, I think, is a really big one, and one we're not great at in America, but we really need to embrace much more fully as we move forward. And so for Matthieu, I know we're close to the end here. Well, actually, one question, and then we'll have Matthieu wrap up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Lawrence. Just from a consumer point of view, and you may have just answered my question, anticipated it, is there a single website that we could go to, basically news we can use, where we can, for instance, if I'm shopping for a new alternative fuel vehicle, something that will pretty much streamline my connecting with the product that I want to use?
In case of the vehicle, yes, there's a campaign that Greenpeace is hosting this. It's called Race to the Top. If you Google race, if you do either, you can put Greenpeace, automobile, deep sea mining, you'll get it. But otherwise, Race to the Top is the main line of the website, and it has a ranking of all the automobile manufacturers, the ones that are the most advanced in their commitment, the most progressive, and the ones that are the less. So that's, I went to that to make my own choice of a hybrid a few months back. So that's the place for EVs.
And we are building a big platform also that's going to be launched globally in September, and a lot of information will be shown on the website. It's deeprising.com.
We're going to do a couple more questions. Let's start over here and then.
Yes. Isn't 40% of the future battery market enough for Gazprom and defense or whoever to actually explore this market and just go and do what they can do, get everything from the seafloor? And second question, is there a way to actually reform the ISA, or is it just there and we stay like this?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah. I want to make sure I understood your first question.
Yes.
So you're saying that
You said 40% of nickel will be still used to the 60% of alternative batteries in the future by 2050.
no, yeah, the data I got, which is secondhand data, is 40%. The current production from landmines of metals are expected to supply 40% of 2050's demand. So if we were to stay at the same level of supply of what we're producing today in terms of land metals, would be enough to supply our demand in 40% of our demand in 2050. So the other 60%, it turns out, according to WWF report, actually, or 58% is what they said, could be met by recycling and new technologies that are not using these metals in the first place. So, and it's actually 30 to 40%. So there is a 30%, there's a 10 to 12% gap that either could be maybe doing a little bit more metals from the land. I mean, there's been a lot of cobalt coming from water. Cobalt, there is some new source of cobalt found in Indonesia recently that brought the price of cobalt way down, actually, in recent months. So, yeah, there's a nickel. I do not have yet.
Yeah, I mean, the whole question of circular economy and closed loop, economy is a tricky one because, let's say, just take a EV, like let's say Tesla, just for an example. So you have how many Teslas in a market, let's say in California. The thing is, the good news is, it's actually very efficient. So you can drive a Tesla. I don't know in miles, but I think it's like 700 kilometers. Like it's a lot. I mean, it's twice or 3 times more than a conventional car. So the good news with the Tesla is it goes for a very, very long time. The bad news is by the time your battery is over, it's a long run. So you're gonna take quite some time to actually get those metals back into the loop. So yes, technically you can cycle the metals. You can take a battery recycling and go for another run. On top of it, you have an exponential increase of EVs on the road. And on top of it, the truth is, a lot of the old Tesla, I mean, we have to be straightforward and bold here, will be shipped to Mexico. Or to, to other economies that, don't have the electric car now, but they're going to have the old park. So what is quite interesting, I was mentioning the bill from the Biden government. One part of this actually executive order might be to ban the export of old car out of the US. So you might be in a situation where you forbid even to drive a Tesla through the border, out of the border of Mexico or even Canada, to be sure there's enough critical metal on the land in the US. So it's as critical. And then how you get all the fresh metal in. So that's a very critical question. So then I think is a question of where you should put the battery in. So, example of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is amazing. You can run a car with green hydrogen. But will people, wants to buy a green hydrogen car? I'm not sure, because it will look very much as a conventional engine, combustible engine. The new design are futuristic and very sexy, and people love, design, and this is why we love iPhone maybe, or we have the thing, because the design is so important. So, I would say, we need to remove the cobalt and nickel and start innovation on EVs. But for me, sorry to say, but the stupidest invention, the stupidest model is actually a gigafactory. Why stocking all this energy in nickel and cobalt? That's where, you can have innovation like green hydrogen. I mean, there's taboo conversation here, but, nuclear and other form of storage to power all those cars. So, you know, it's like, it's really of a question of like a kind of mapping the energy grid and really see where the battery are most important and stick to this, and not having this kind of agenda that's, you know, again, the Biden administration and John Kerry and all have been pushing for so many years of electrifying everything with batteries. And that's, you know, that doesn't, because, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
I have two very small comments on the recycling, couple of recycling. 2025 is when we expect the first wave of EVs batteries to start retiring, because about 8 years is the life of an EV battery typically. So there is going to be an inflow. We haven't really seen that yet. That first wave of batteries to be recycled will be about then, which is 2 years away. The other point is the lithium-ion batteries, which is what has been used until now, that is using so much of those bad metals, are also the easiest to recycle. So those will be, you know, even if they weren't originally designed to be recycled, they are actually easier recycled, and they will get easier and easier. So there are companies now that are still continuing to make those, but they're doing them in a way that they're recyclable, and they have a full life cycle management. Yeah. So that's 2 points.
Great.
Yeah.
Do we have one more question? No? Okay, you two, you're the last two questions. Go ahead here.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your idea. Do you feel this issue about deep sea mining is something that is known to the public? I mean, we are all pretty much informed about what's happening in the ocean, I guess, but do you have the feeling that the general public knows about how problematic that is?
This is why we have movies like his.
Yeah, but that's it.
What can we do to spread the word?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest challenge, and it's again like preaching. You know, we're preaching to the choir. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone in the room here, we all align otherwise you wouldn't be here, and it's such a beautiful sunny day at noon on a Saturday. You know, like there's a reason why you're here.
Or you would have asked a much harder question.
No, exactly. So the issue is like for us is what we're building. So basically in September we have this massive campaign going out, which are educational. We're going to have short clips, but fundamentally, you know, in the process of doing this project, also between us, you know, I had Dr. Sylvia Hurl as a narrator. You know, her deepness, and I was like, wow, she's perfect. You know, and then I was like, yeah, but you know, she's going to preach to the choir again. Like, go to the, you know. And then you kind of, for me, it was this shift, like getting Aquaman. I was like, oh wow, okay, Aquaman, so many people love Aquaman. It's like, he's going to the shopping mall everywhere in the planet. I don't, you know, I would maybe watch Aquaman half asleep in a plane. I would never go to the theater for that. And I was like, this is actually really good, because, you know, I need to speak to the people who look like myself and I'm in this room with like, so yeah, that's what we're building up basically in the next few months, trying to get this massive, using celebrities. You know, my dream is to have like someone like Messi involved, like the soccer player. Like he needs, I mean, that's, if Messi starts tweeting about it and posting Instagram about it, I mean, this is massive. This like gets to the right people who just, because I don't watch soccer, so I'm thinking like, this is where it goes. So, you know, I mean, seriously, it's like kind of, I'm kind of starting to think what I'm not doing is where I need to go.
And to that point, I just want to say this is the time to go viral with this idea. So I believe it's July 9th is when decisions are going to be made about whether people can start really mining the deep sea. And so I think that this is the time for a lot of movement to be happening. And to your point about people not knowing it, I think that the social media world is a great opportunity to help really get the word out. And so some of the organizations that we mentioned, like the Oxygen Project and Sustainable Ocean Alliance, these are ways to get the word out. And this is really the first time in history where we're able to prevent a natural disaster. And so that's why it's so important to go viral now, so that we can actually not see the natural disaster unfold.
Yeah, great point. Do we have one last question here? One last one, and then we'll be around afterwards. Go ahead.
For those of us who unfortunately missed the film, is there another place where we can see it?
Perfect. That was
Yeah.
going to be one of
Great.
the last questions. So, Matthieu, where can we go see your film?
Not now. So unfortunately, I mean, because we're still doing like festival run, and you know, I mean, go to deeprising.com. You know, we're hosting a lot of screenings, but there's not like an online version right now. It's coming, you know. But we're still running the festivals.
So the question, one last question from online is Jason Momoa is still taking a role in promoting the film. How is he going to be engaged?
100%. It was very a pleasure for me to work with him, especially when we did the premiere at Sundance, because, you know, we were going through all these TV interviews and even the Q&As and all the studios, and I mean, is a big deal. He's a big, you know, A-list Hollywood star. And it was very moving for me because he keeps saying to the audience and the media that, you know, Deep Rising and the Deep Ocean is the most important, meaningful work ever done in his life. It's like, you know, and I cannot announce anything here, but, you know, we are actually working on the next steps with Jason Momoa to really, you know, do more work, basically, advocacy work, and just, you know, kind of the plan is beyond deep sea bed mining. Is really bringing the deep ocean to the masses. So Jason Momoa is, for me, perfect for that, because also is Polynesian. You know, he has, you know, his father is a one from Hawaii. Is linked. You know, he has people in his ancestor, like the grandfather is a whale whisperer. So you know, it was very moving for me when we did the voiceover recording in Los Angeles, because there was a scene with a sperm whale, and you see this like really, I mean, he's big and strong. He's seriously big and strong, and you see him like just in his recording booth, and starting making the voiceover and crying. He couldn't do it, you know, and I was like so moved, you know, because he has this power kind of, but at the same time really soft heart, and he loves the ocean. So yeah, it's going to be in for the long run.
Okay, let me give you your chance,
I
please.
was just curious about the people that you filmed, how it more or less reflected them in a not so positive way, and why they agreed to be filmed in that way. So the CEO and
Yep.
Question.
like, that was because I didn't know whether he had a different understanding going in or what he was expecting.
Yeah, when I started the whole film, basically I was like, I have two choices here. I mean, to be fair, you know, like I started the film from an industry perspective, you know. The first character was Gerald Barron, and after I was looking for, it's not the way around. After I was like, absolutely need a scientist who just kind of counter him, obviously. But the whole premise is, you know, I have two choices when I started the film 5 years ago. I can do a full-on, you know, hard-hitting film against deep sea bed mining, and having, you know, Greenpeace attacking the boat because they do, and put big risk letter on the boat, and, you know, having a bunch of scientists talking how bad it is. But then it's the same story I just said, like, I'm going to preach to the choir. So a lot of people will not even start the conversation with us, because it's going to, yet a leftist kind of whatever movement trying, you know, it's like, and that's the issue. We need to break this, you know, if we want things to happen. Cross the border, exactly. And the process with Gerald Barron, not only him, like the industry in general, like, because there's also Patania, there's other industry, like there's few examples. But that was my, you know, what I tell them is like, I give you a chance to give to the audience, you know, your point of view. Obviously, absolutely no editorial control, and you're going to have very strong voice against you, but it was a deal, kind of, you know, like, and at the end, you know, I think, like, I think, you know, the industry, what they're trying to do, to be fair, is, you know, finding solution to the supply chain crisis. So when, you know, for me, you know, the real issue here is not, you know, Gerald Barron and the metal company, is actually over them, kind of, the people who are actually designing the narrative. You know, I'm very happy to hear that Tesla is moving to iron phosphate, but otherwise I would say, you know, Elon Musk is much more dangerous in the narrative than Joe Barron is, because he's the one who actually, you know, greenwashing at a way higher level in a way, you know, saying, like, making so many people that believe that you absolutely need a Tesla to save the planet, but that's driven destruction of ecosystem, you know. So it's like, and there's a scene in actually Deep Rising where you see all this massive biodiversity loss in Indonesia, and the voiceover of Elon Musk calling the investor of getting more nickel, and like really calling the miner to get nickel. So you're Gerald Barron, you listen to the world's richest man and asking for nickel, and you know they have the biggest untapped resource of nickel. As a businessman, as, you know, as an opportunistic businessman, what you do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. We've reached our time. I want to thank the panel. Great job. Matthieu, thank you for your...
Thank the audience for coming. coming
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
thank
Saturday
Thank you,
you
yeah.
very much for being here. Matthieu, thank you for a very interesting and great film. I look forward to getting out there more and helping with that. And enjoy the rest of the film festival. Thank
And
you
there's
for being
a
here.
flyer, I have a little brochure to 4-page on the table on their way out that breaks down some of those 4 arguments that we talked about today. There's also a QR code on the back side that has a link to some of the resources we also mentioned it today. They're not all there, but there's a few there. So I encourage you to pick one up.
Thank you so much.